So 8C, we've been reading My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, and obviously I didn't want us to not be able to finish this book, so we're going to finish it together. Obviously you've not got a copy of the book, but I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to read today for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be an activity to do afterwards linked with what we've been reading, okay? So if you remember last week, we just got up to the point where Jamie had his parents' evening. That had gone terribly because of Dad's behaviour when he saw Sonia and her mum. And then Jazz had just agreed to get involved in the talent show with him. The last week of term was rubbish. Sonia wasn't talking to me, and I got sick of the snowballs Daniel threw at my face and the ice he put down my Spider-Man top, and the fact that everyone got Christmas cards except me. There was this letterbox in the library, and you pushed your cards inside at the end of the day, and at the end of the day they got delivered to the people in the class. The headmaster would do it with a Santa hat on, and he'd come into our room and say, "Ho, ho, ho." Then he'd read out the names and the cards in his hand, and there were always loads for Ryan and loads for Daniel and quite a few for Sonia. This confused me at first, because Sonia's been standing on her own in the playground, so I was surprised she was that popular. But then I saw that all her cards were drawn in felt tips on A4 paper and were signed in her handwriting by superheroes. She sent herself one from Batman and one from Shrek and one from the Green Goblin, who everyone knows is Spider-Man's biggest enemy. She put that one by her pencil case so I could see it. We haven't spoken since parents' evening, and she won't use my special pencils anymore. There's so much I want to tell her about Britain's biggest talent show, and I'll plan to send a letter to Mum and leave a note for Dad to tell them to come to the Manchester Palace Theatre on January the 5th. I want to sing her our song and show her our dance moves and tell her that they will solve everything. When Mum's back and Dad's stopped drinking and they've forgotten all about Rose, Dad'll be too happy to hate Sonia. He might not like us being friends, but Mum will say, "Just leave them alone," and Sonia will come round for tea. We'll eat tropical pizzas, and they will forget that she's a Muslim. It's Christmas Eve in 2 days. I don't think the post comes on December the 24th, or December the 25th, or December the 26th, and there was nothing this morning, apart from one of those sad letters from a charity that asks you to think about all the starving people in Africa while you're eating your turkey. I'll try to remember them when I have my Christmas dinner, which is going to be chicken sandwiches this year because Jazz is making it. I don't think the charity people will mind what I eat, as long as I spare a thought for those dying of hunger while I'm at the table. If there's no post over Christmas, then that leaves tomorrow for Mum to send a present. I'm trying to get excited. I keep imagining a fat parcel on the mat by the front door, but every time I think of the card with "Happy Christmas, Son" in big blue letters, I get that weird flicker of something that scares me. It never really goes away now. I asked Mrs. Farmer how much warning she'd have to give the headmaster if she needed a day off. She looked annoyed that I was talking to her and kept glancing at the display above her desk as if all the coffee splashes on the angels were my fault. Eventually she said, "If it was important enough, I'd be allowed time off straight away, and I'd go outside and play and stop asking silly questions." If it was important enough. I couldn't get those words out of my head. They whizzed round my brain and made me dizzy. When we wrote stories, my pen didn't touch the paper, and when we did maths, I made up all the numbers, and when we did art, I drew lambs bigger than the shepherds because I wasn't concentrating. It looked like a herd of killer sheep was going to trample over the crib. For the school play, surprise, surprise, we acted out the stable bit, and I was a person for the first time ever. I got the part of the man who said, "No room at the inn," but no one came to watch, so it didn't matter. Jazz couldn't get back from school in time, and Dad hasn't been out of bed since parents' evening. Sonia got the part of Mary at first, but she wouldn't stop groaning and holding her belly as if she was giving birth when she walked up to the inn. In the rehearsal, Mrs. Farmer pulled Sonia off the chair in the middle of the stage and made her get on all fours and told her that she was an ox and to keep at the back of the stable. On the very last day, I was desperate to talk to Sonia, but I couldn't think how to get started. When she wasn't looking, I chucked my pencil underneath her chair and was about to ask her to pick it up when Mrs. Farmer sent me out for throwing sharp objects around the classroom. She said, "You could have poked someone's eye out," which was a lie. The pencil was blunt, and anyway, I threw it really low. Unless there was an invisible midget walking round, it didn't go near anyone's eyes. When I was allowed back into the classroom, the pencil was still by Sonia's feet, but I didn't dare ask for it because Mrs. Farmer had made it obvious that I'd chucked it there on purpose. I had to do my graph in pen and I plotted it all wrong and I couldn't rub it out, so I'll get a bad mark. Doesn't matter though. I'm not interested in A's anymore. Jazz was right about school. It's not that important really. When it was time to go, Mrs. Farmer said, "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. School starts again on January the 7th, so I'll see you all then." Time was running out to make friends, so I stayed in the classroom as everyone left and watched Sonia pack away. She took ages over it, putting her books in a neat pile and making sure her felt tips had their lids on and were in the packet in rainbow order. I got the feeling she was waiting for me to speak, but she was humming really loud, and Granny always says, "It's rude to interrupt." 5 strands of hair were dangling over her face, and she kept brushing them out of her eyes. Words like perfect and shiny and beautiful flew around my head, but before I could say anything, Sonia walked off. She went to get her coat, and I followed, and she ran down the corridor, and I followed, and she burst out of the door and onto the drive, but stopped when I yelled, "Oi!" It wasn't the nicest word I could have said, but it got her attention. She turned around. Most people had gone, and it was already dark, but Sonia's hijab glowed like fire in the orange streetlights. I wanted to say Happy Christmas, but Sonia doesn't celebrate it, so I said Happy Winter instead. She looked a bit confused, and I panicked that maybe she didn't celebrate the seasons either. She started walking backwards and was getting further and further away, and I didn't want her to disappear into the night, so I shouted the first thing that came into my head. "Happy Ramadan!" Sonia stopped moving. I ran up to her and held out my hand and said it again. "Happy Ramadan!" The words were hot in the frosty air, and each syllable steamed. Sonia stared at me for a long time, and I smiled hopefully until she said, "Ramadan was in September." I was scared I'd offended her, but then her eyes started to sparkle, and the freckle by her lip twitched as if she was about to smile. The bracelets tinkled. She lifted her arm. My fingers trembled as her hand moved towards mine. They were 25 centimetres apart, 10 centimetres apart, 5 centi. Someone beeped a horn, and Sonia jumped and gasped, "Mum!" and ran up the gritted path and got in the car. The door slammed, the engine started. 2 twinkling eyes stared at me from out of the front window. My fingers were still trembling as the car disappeared down the dark road. Jazz bought me loads of little Christmas presents, a Man United ruler and rubber, a new can of deodorant because I'd run out. She wrapped them all up and put them in one of my football socks so it looked like a stocking. I made her a photo frame out of cardboard and stuck the only picture I could find of the 2 of us inside it. No Mum, no Dad, no Rose, just me and Jazz. And I surrounded us in black and pink flowers because she's a girl and they're her favourite colours. And I got her a box of her favourite chocolates to make her eat something because she's too skinny. We made chicken sandwiches with stuffing and microwave chips, and we ate it in front of Spider-Man. It wasn't as good as I remember from my birthday, but I still enjoyed it, especially the bit when Spider-Man beats up the Green Goblin. Roger nibbled bits of my sandwich, but Jazz didn't touch hers. "Saving room for my chocolates," she said, and she ate 3 of them later, which made me feel nice. She kept glancing out of the window with a sad look on her face, but every time I noticed, she changed it to a grin. Mum didn't send any presents, and Dad has no idea what day it is because he just lies in bed and drinks and snores and drinks and snores, so he didn't give us anything either. The only thing he did all Christmas was bang on the bedroom floor and shout, "Stop making that racket!" when we were singing carols as loud as we could. At 9 o'clock, there was a tap on the window, and Jazz looked at me and I looked at her, and we both crept the curtain. For a millisecond, I thought it might be Mum knocking on the glass, and I felt annoyed with my heart beating faster when I knew that it wouldn't be her. We moved the curtain out of the way, and Jazzy's breath tickled my ear. I couldn't see anything, just snow in the front garden, but when my eyes got used to the dark, I could see a sentence written all in white. "I love you." Jazz squeaked as if it was for her, and I felt disappointed because that meant it wasn't for me. She pulled on Dad's wellies and tiptoed outside, and she looked funny with her pink hair and green dressing gown dragging through the snow. I pressed my face against the window and watched her find the card that Leo had left in the garden. I saw the way her eyes shone and her smile burned and her heart swelled in her chest like a cake rising in the rusty oven we used for cooking at school. She kissed the card as if it was the best thing ever, and it got me thinking. It took me 2 hours to make. With my special pencils, I drew lots of snowflakes and a snowman that looked like me and a snowman that looked like her, and I covered the whole thing in glitter. Roger sat next to me as I worked on my tiny bedroom floor and kept getting in the way, so now he has silver sparkles in his tail. It was easier to write in the card than to talk to Sonia's face, so I put down all the things that I've wanted to say since the very beginning. Things like, thank you for being my friend, and I like looking at your freckle, and Dad is a bully, but I'm not like him, so please wear the blue tack ring. I told her all about the audition and how everything would be perfect once Mum came home and sorted Dad out, and how we could be friends after January the 5th. Even though I was running out of room, I invited her to come to Manchester Palace Theatre to watch the talent show and said that she would be amazed by Jazz's singing and impressed by my dance moves. I signed the card from the only superhero she didn't get one from at school, Spider-Man. I had to wait for Jazz to go to sleep before I could sneak out and post it. The first time I crept into her room to see if her eyes were closed, she was whispering into her mobile phone and said, "Get out, you spying little bastard." But the second time I checked, she was fast asleep and her hand was dangling off the bed with her mouth open and her pink hair in a tangle on the pillow. The wind chime tinkled as I gently closed the door. It was 11 o'clock when I put on my wellies. Roger rubbed his orange fur against the red rubber like he knew we were about to have an adventure. His green eyes looked wider than normal as we tiptoed towards the front door. "Shh," I said, because he started to purr. In the quiet cottage, it sounded as loud as a truck's engine. The door creaked as I opened it, and the snow crunched as I trod on it, but nobody heard, and I walked down the drive without being seen. It felt so naughty to be outside on Christmas night. I kept expecting police sirens to start screaming and blue lights to start flashing and someone shout, "You're under arrest!" But nothing happened. Everything was silent. All I could see was the moon bouncing off the frosty tops of the Black Mountains. I was free. I felt giddy and started to laugh, and Roger looked at me as though I was mental. I felt like there was no one in the whole world except me and my cat, and we could do anything we wanted, anything at all. I danced on the spot and waved my hands in the air and wiggled my bum, and no one saw. I spun on the spot, faster and faster, the snow a white blur that zoomed past my eyes. I jumped on a wall and walked across it, my smile bigger than it has been since I scored the winning goal. The card flapped in the breeze, and I imagined Sonia reading it, maybe even kissing the place where I'd written Spider-Man. That made me feel I could fly, so I leapt off the wall and flapped my arms, and for a millisecond I actually hovered above the snow before landing on one foot. My blood fizzed like Coke at a party, and my body tingled, and I had more energy than ever in my life. Roger said, "Meow," and I said, "I know what you mean," and I told him I'd meet him back at the cottage. I kissed his wet nose and his whiskers tickled my lips. Then I ran off as fast as I could, and the cold wind stung my cheeks. My hands slapped against Sonia's gate. I was panting and my pulse was racing, and my feet were aching and my sweat was pouring. This was the bravest thing I had ever done, ever, and I grinned as I pushed open the gate and ran up Sonia's drive. When I jumped over the fence, I flew for a bit before landing in the back garden. I was a bird and Wayne Rooney and Spider-Man all rolled into one, and there was nothing that scared me, not even Sammy the dog, who had started growling in the kitchen. I put the card on the lawn and grabbed a stone. I threw it at Sonia's window, but it hit the wall 2 meters below. I picked up another one. This one went flying over the roof. In books, they always make it sound dead easy to hit the glass, but it took me 11 goes. When the pebble tapped the window, I ran away and hid behind a bush because I wanted Sonia to find the card. I counted to 100. Nothing happened. Sammy the dog was going crazy, barking and scratching and snarling, but I didn't care. I found a bigger rock, and this time it was perfect and hit the window hard. I sprinted back to the bush, cutting my cheek on a thorn, but it didn't sting one bit. This time I only had to count to 13. A curtain twitched and a dark face appeared at the window. A light came on. The dark face was a man's. Sonia's dad said something over his shoulder to a person I couldn't see. He stared at the patio and the trees and the lawn, and Sammy was growling, and I was scared they'd let him out and he'd find me in the bush. Sonia's dad didn't see the card. After 5 minutes checking for burglars, he closed the curtains and turned off the light, and Sammy barked for a bit, but then he was quiet. I didn't dare move, so I stayed there as still as I could, even though a twig was digging into my leg and I had pins and needles in my right foot. I stared at the window, and I didn't blink, so my eyes dried up. I wanted Sonia to open the curtains, and I wanted her to find the card, and I wanted to make her happy because she'd been so sad at school. I thought about her hand and my hand and how they'd almost touched, and I wondered what would have happened if her mum hadn't beat the horn. After about 1,000,000 years, I thought I was safe to move. A church clock struck midnight as I crawled out of the bush, and the branches snapped and the sleeve of my t-shirt ripped. When I picked up the card, it was all soggy. Snow had soaked right through the envelope. I was just wondering if I should leave it or take it back home or post it through Sonia's letterbox when I heard the door of the kitchen slide open. I should have run, or I should have hid, or I should have dropped to the floor and covered myself in snow, but my body wouldn't move. My back was facing the house, so I had no idea who was there, and I jumped when a wet tongue licked my hand. Sammy wagged his tail, and it beat against my shaking leg. I counted to 3 and turned around, and there she was. Her scarf was wrapped around her hair, but not as tight as normal. It looked like she'd just done it dead quick. She was wearing blue pyjamas, and I could see her toes, and they were tiny and brown and straight, and they looked nice on the kitchen floor. She stared at me, and I stared at her, but she didn't smile. I said, "Hello," and she put a finger on her lips to tell me to be quiet. I walked over to her, and my arms felt too long, and my legs felt too clumsy, and my face felt too hot. I held out the card, but she didn't look happy like Jazz had done. I said, "This is a card especially for you, and I made it out of paper and glitter," just in case she didn't realise how special it was. She didn't say thank you, or wow, or squeak like girls do when they're happy. She said, "Shh," and looked over her shoulder as if she was scared someone might see. I forced it into her hand and waited for her to open the envelope. If she saw the snowman in the Spider-Man top and the snowman in the hijab, I knew she'd find it funny and smile. But she hid the card under her pyjamas and whispered, "You have to go." When I didn't move, she looked over her shoulder again and said, "Please, just go. I'm not allowed to be friends with you. My mum thinks you're bad news." I said, "What?" And she put her hand over my mouth. My lips burned like they did on Halloween. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She said, "Go," and pushed me away, and she grabbed Sammy by the collar and pulled him inside. A light came on as I ran through the snow, and Sonia closed the kitchen door, and this time when I jumped over the garden fence, I fell rather than flew and hit the cold earth with a bang. I dropped my Cocoa Pops when Jazz walked into the kitchen. I hardly recognised her. "You look like—" I started, and she said, "Shut it, and find me a pen." It took her 10 goes to write the message to Dad. One said, "Please, please, please come," but that sounded desperate, so the next one said, "Be there or else," which was a bit too threatening. After 8 more attempts, she finally wrote, "Dad, we have a surprise for you and would love it if you'd come to Manchester Palace Theatre today. Be there at 1 p.m. for the show of a lifetime." I was more nervous than the most nervous person I can think of, which right now is the lion in The Wizard of Oz. My tummy had something bigger and scarier than butterflies in it. Maybe they were eagles or hawks or something. Well, now I come to think of it, they could have been those monkeys with wings that kidnapped Dorothy and take her to the witch that's scared of water. Whatever they were, they kept biting at my skin and swooping about, not in a nice way. I was scared I'd forget everything and mess it all up, so I kept running through the words and the dance move as Jazz wrote the message. That's why she had to get rid of the 6th attempt at Dad's letter. I knocked her pen with my leg as I did a high kick. For some reason that made me laugh, and she looked annoyed and whispered, "Bloody hell, Jamie!" And then she wouldn't let me help her put the letter on Dad's bedside table or set the alarm in his room for 7:15 in case I was too noisy. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were being quiet, even though there was no need. Dad doesn't wake up in the middle of the day when the television's blasting in the lounge, but we still tiptoed about, and our hearts went boom if one of us dropped something or spoke too loud. Jazz was scared because Leo was picking us up in his car and she didn't want Dad to see and go mental. I was scared because if Dad found out and stopped us from going, then he'd never get back together with Mum. We'd sent her a letter on December the 28th, so it has plenty of time to get there, and Mr. Walker's no excuse this time. The college is closed at Christmas. I made the competition sound really important and kept writing once in a lifetime opportunity, which I'd heard on TV, and come to Manchester to change your life, which I stole from the letter, and please Mum, I really need to see you, which I just made up myself. Can't believe I'm doing this, Jazz said as we went to the lounge to wait for Leo. My horoscope said not to take a risk today. She breathed shakily with her hand onto her chest. Let's go through this one more time, I said, watching her fingers tremble. We whispered the words and did the dance moves, but Roger had woken up and kept getting in the way. He was twisting his body around my feet so I couldn't jump or stamp or run around Jazz like I have to in verse 1. He was getting on my nerves, but I was trying not to say anything because I still felt bad for slamming the door in his face. When I tripped over his sparkly tail, though, I lost it a bit. I leaned down and he looked at me all hopeful as if he was about to get a stroke. But instead of rubbing his fur, I picked him up and took him in the hall and shut him out of the lounge. He kept meowing at the door, but I ignored him, and eventually he got bored and ran off. He's here, Jazz squeaked. A blue car pulled up outside the cottage. She fiddled with her new hair and said, "Is it okay?" And I said, "Yes," even though it looked strange. She must have dyed it brown last night, and it was tied neatly in 2 short plaits. She looked so like Rose, it was weird. I know they were identical and everything, but Jazz just looks like Jazz now. When I got into Leo's car, it was like Rose's spirit had come down from that cloud in heaven, and I missed the piercings and pink hair and black clothes. Jazz was wearing a flowery dress, a cardigan, and flat shoes with buckles, the last clothes that Mum had bought her in London. I was still in my Spider-Man t-shirt, because Mum would be disappointed if I turned up not wearing it. I'd made it as smart as possible by wiping it with a cloth and fixing my sleeve with safety pins. Leo raised his eyebrows when he saw Jazz. She looked at him with her face all stressed and said, "It's just for today." And Leo looked relieved but said, "You look cute." Then Jazz laughed and he laughed, and I felt left out, so I laughed, and then we were on our way. We drove fast because the letter said it was first come, first served, and only 150 acts would have time to go on stage. We sped through the mountains, and the sun rose as we climbed up hills and zoomed past farms and wiggled down country lanes. At one point, we were driving right into the sun, and the car was filled with this orange-yellow light, and it was warm, like being inside an egg yolk or something. And everything looked beautiful, and everything felt hopeful, and all of a sudden, I couldn't wait to get on stage. Okay, so we'll leave the reading there for today. What I'd like you to do is, we've done work when we were doing story writing, we've done work about writing from different perspectives. Now obviously this story is written from Jamie's perspective. What I'd like you to do is choose a section of it that we've just listened to and write it from either Jazz's perspective or Sonia's perspective. So you could do the bit where Jamie turns up at Sonia's house in the middle of the night on Christmas night, or you could do Christmas Day and how that felt for Jazz, or even the morning when they're getting ready, writing the letter to Dad and going off to the talent show. So one of those two sections of the story, you're either going to write it from Sonia's perspective or from Jazz's perspective. You should give yourself about 20 minutes to do that. Okay, off you go.